Hey, I've been waiting for this moment for a long time, and it's happening.
Hey, here we
Cheers.
are. We're doing it. Yeah, cheers, my friend.
We're here with Joe Waters, one of my closest friends and brothers, and we're just having coffee and talking about continuous improvement. And so I know you, but why don't you introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about you?
Yeah, sure. Joe Waters. I've had an interesting career that has gone through manufacturing, software development, database design, website design, client interactions, and sales, to project management, and then that all kind of led up to continuous improvement and innovation in nonprofit organizations specifically.
Great. And, we connected in that space of continuous improvement.
Hmm.
And can you point a moment in time where you recognize that, yeah, like I like this thing of continuous improvement? Or when did that happen?
Yeah. So my first job right out of, trade school, I went to trade school to be a welder. And then I got out of that and I got a job as a welder. I started off as a forklift driver, wanted to do something a little, it's part of the progression. You either become a welder or you work on the machine shop. So I went to be a welder and did that for a while. And the owner of that was very passionate about continuous improvement. And this is the late 90s. I mean, they adopted it pretty early. And the first thing they did was 5S's, right? So all of our places were a mess. Everything was everywhere. You needed a tool. You started rummaging through people's, tables, looking for tools. You'd spend a lot of time looking for stuff. So we just started with 5S'ing everything. Uh, and that made the job a lot easier. We could find stuff, it improved productivity, and we weren't having to deal with people as they were working and interrupting them to try and look for stuff. But the thing that really brought it home to me was they had the traditional method where they had like all of the welders in one area. They had all the machinists in another area. They had a saw that would chop the wood to the right or the metal to the right length in a different area. And then we had this huge warehouse where we would store all of it. And as the forklift driver, my first job was to go to bin A26 and take that pallet to machine 54. And then when they're done, take it back to an open spot in the warehouse, and then take it to the welders, and then take it to the assembly people at the end. But they introduced the cell methodology and just-in-time manufacturing, where they took all of these different people that did different things and put them together in a cell. And so now all of a sudden, instead of going and getting the pieces off the saw and delivering them to whoever, it's all right there. And so the guy would saw a piece, and then that piece would go right into the machine that would then turn it down. And once they were done, it would go to the next step. And then it would come to me, the welder, to weld it all together. Then it would go to the assembly guy and they would assemble it and it would be ready to go. And we would be putting out one piece constantly as opposed to putting out 500 pieces in batches. And the reason that was huge to me is because I was the forklift driver and I would just spend 8 hours a day driving around, moving stuff from place to place and taking it to the wrong place, and they would have to have it go back and come back. Things would get banged up as you're moving it around, and it took forever. But going from that to a cell methodology where you're just doing just-in-time manufacturing, you're not having a lot of that storage waste. And then when something happens at the end, right, the assembly guy takes the different parts and he puts it in. He's like, hey, this piece doesn't fit with this piece. You stop production and you've lost 5. The previous way, we wouldn't know it until the end. We would lose 500 parts and it would be lost from all the other different pieces of the step also. And our profit sharing was always being tanked by scrapped parts and waste. So our income and our pay was directly related to how much waste we had through those bonuses. So going through the cell methodology, being able to identify defects quickly and easily, not having all of that space wasted in the warehouse to drive stuff around, not all the transport waste, really opened my eyes to this is really valuable. It doesn't make sense when you first think about it if you've been in the old way forever. I'm a welder. I need to be with my welding colleagues. We have our own stuff, and we need to make sure that we're a tight knit group and we're challenging each other to do better as welders. But once you get your mindset out of that and you think of yourself as a team that's building a part or building a finished product, it changes your mind and it makes a lot of sense. So that kind of kicked it all off for me.
Joe, let me tell you, I hear a lot of stories about continuous improvement. This story is at the top of my list.
Mine
And
too. I love it. I'm so happy to be a part of it. Yeah.
and I'm gonna challenge you that for those who are listening, I'm gonna put you on the spot. I think Joe at some point is gonna write a book, and I want this to be one of the uh, first chapters of the story of how you became this continuous improvement champion and expert. Because it just has this so many elements that makes it a great story because you live that experience.
Mm-hmm.
Right? It's a different that if I come and facilitate that process, which I've done many times, but if the story that you tell is about you being in the middle of the story,
Yeah.
and that experience, I think it was impactful and it shaped the way you lead in continuous improvement. So fast forward, and it's gonna be fun to be able to connect the dots.
Mm-hmm.
You and I met in this big nonprofit organization, and you were really interested on doing this Kaizen with the team that you were leading. And that's when we met. So why don't you tell people a little bit of the story of what happened? Because I think it's really fun.
Yeah. So I was the director of production part of a nonprofit organization. And as kind of a newer director, there was this one process that just took heaps of people all year long to do. And, there's a lot of information gathering from a lot of different sources that is time-based. But there's a very distinct deadline that everything had to be delivered at a certain time. And I knew there was a lot of waste. And Carlos and I had been talking about Kaizen, about continuous improvement and all of that. And I went to my boss and was like, I want to do a Kaizen process on this. And so, I partnered with Carlos. He gave us a bunch of free work to do, which was basically just looking at a slide deck that's an introduction to continuous improvement to get everyone familiar with the terms, right? And to get everyone kind of familiar with what's going on during this week-long Kaizen. But as the director, I found it really helpful also because it helped me know how to lead through this. So Carlos came in and he led the Kaizen, but I was the business owner of that process. So having all of that was really helpful. The thing that really stood out to me is I was new to the process, but through this Kaizen, I was able to go through and look at the entire process end to end and every single step of the way, not that's been documented 15 years ago or 10 years ago or even a year ago by someone who does one part of the process but maybe doesn't understand everything else. We had everybody in the room together that did the whole process. So soup to nuts, we had everyone in there to do it. And then we go through and we map out the entire process. And through that, me as the director, I learned the process. It was great. I knew reality of how every step of the way got done, where our trigger points or where our waste was that we really need to focus on. And I learned the process. But I was also a bit of a casual observer because I was not the one going through and documenting it out. I was on one of the teams, but it was the people that actually do the work that was mapping it out. So we had a glimpse of reality. And the other thing is, the Kaizen was in the Philippines. I live in New York. So, I was leading a team in the Philippines to do this process. It also made me really tight with the team. I knew who did each part, and I could watch and say, oh, this person is an authority on this step. They get it. And this person's manager is really good at managing people, but this is the person that knows how to do this step in the process. So there's a lot of value as a director leading a business unit and being accountable for a process, to knowing who the people are that do it, who are the experts of that, and then what is that process. Because I actually took a picture of it, blew it up, and took it home and put it on my wall. So anytime I'd be talking with people in my one-on-ones, they'd be like, hey, step 16 in process 34 is messed up. And I could go to my thing. It's like, oh, are you talking about this step in the process? Great. There's, a yes, no decision that comes out of this. And if it's no, it's a problem. So are we hitting yes or no? That's all extra benefits as a director, seeing that business process from end to end and the people. But then the other thing that was really great is, towards the end, that last day, we went through and we relooked at the process. We identified where our waste was, and we started thinking about how do we get less waste? And where's our biggest opportunity for improvement? And what are the dependencies on that? So with everybody in the room, we all sat down and said, okay, we have this big convoluted project, and 4 or 5 different teams work on this to make this done. And the fifth step in the process that's done by this fifth team, if someone does something a little bit different, a long ways up in the workflow, it makes their job a lot easier. We identify waste a lot quicker. We started implementing a more just-in-time processing method so that we're not, have heaps of waste. We have a couple of pieces of waste, and then we adjust and we fix. So coming out of there with a new process was really great. And then to also have our objectives in place and an idea of how we're going to implement that as, kind of separate little mini projects to improve it was really great. The other thing that it did was it put the ownership on the people that do the work. So they had to go through that slide deck. They had to learn what a Kaizen is. They had to learn what the 5S's are. They had to learn the different types of waste kind of as a pre-read. And then, you did a great job of people who didn't read the pre-read, which happens all the time, getting them up to speed and making sure that they're, comfortable in that situation. But what it did is it taught the whole team how to do a Kaizen. It started to build a culture of continuous improvement, which is what I really wanted on the team. I don't want to be the person going in and saying, that's waste, stop doing that. That's waste, stop doing that. You need to do this as just in time. You need to put together a more, I can lead through that, but that's not a culture change. A culture change is when you change how people think, and Kaizen does that from the top all the way to the people that actually do the work. The global director also came out. He had great ownership in this also, which I'm really grateful for, and is really crucial to the success of this, because I've had other projects where we didn't have such great buy-in and they fell a little flat, and we can talk about that in a second. But having the global director present, not the whole time, but at the kickoff, to let everyone know that he's behind it, or that, whatever they come out with, she is going to endorse and make sure it gets implemented. And then maybe at the midpoint of, hey, how we do, and then they see the process, and then they can see, oh, wow, this is really good. And then they also have that reference to see the whole process and then at the end to say, great, what are the top 5 things that we need to take away from this time? What are we going to do, and when are you going to get them done, to put that fire under people to make it actually happen? So I just kind of went through a bunch of stuff, but I think it's really good as a culture change of the people that actually do the work. As the director, I learned the process end to end really well. I identified who the experts are. I also got the opportunity to kind of identify who my star players are for promotion, and kind of who to flag for the natural leaders that maybe don't get an opportunity to lead. And then also engaging upper management so that they're behind the project, so that everyone sees that they're behind it. They're going to be supported on it. And it also helps change that top-down culture of getting them behind continuous improvement, as long as you implement what you set out to do. If you do a Kaizen and then you start to get that culture change, but you don't actually implement any projects, you don't measure, and you don't come back with improvements, then it's kind of a waste of time. So there is some accountability with having top level leadership involved, but I think it's crucial for the success of it.
Mm-hmm. Wow. You just gave us a class on, no, seriously, like you touch on so many important elements of continuous improvement. And again, the thing that always impressed me about you is that you do it without really, sometimes I feel like understanding the role that you play in these type of situations. Because as much as you're talking about the importance of having the global leader, but to me, what it was a highlight was you as a director being a participant presently, and then I still have a lot of pictures of you listening to them and you facilitating with post-its and putting their ideas. And so to me,
Mm-hmm.
the message that you were sending with the involvement, I think it was big for the success of this Kaizen. And you know,
Yeah.
one of the reflections I have about that, and this is something that somebody asked me a few years ago. They asked me, how do you make leaders to go to the Gemba, which Gemba is where the action happened, when
Mm-hmm.
you have a transactional process? And I I kind of started thinking about that, and then that image that you describe of you in Manila doing this Kaizen came to mind, and so I told this person, I said, hey, sometimes in transactional processes, you need to do this type of Kaizen so that the leader can see the Gemba, which is exactly what you did. By you going through this exercise of mapping the process, and because you're dealing with information, it's not like in the manufacturing where you have the
Mm-hmm.
product. So by you doing that and then bringing the global leader and then having also the supervisors going through the entire process, you really what you were doing is that you were going to the Gemba and understanding exactly what is it people do, what is they struggle with, and all that. So I thought it was a huge exercise of, it was like a Gemba walk in the
Mm-hmm.
Kaizen. So thank you. So then tell us, because you kept growing as far as your practice and understanding of continuous improvement. Um, we're gonna have to do another episode so you can tell us more about your application of project management in the
Mm-hmm.
context of Kaizen, as well as like all the things you learn about Agile. But for now, why don't we jump to, you are now a certified black belt, and you were working on this project that I thought it was very cool. Can you tell us a little bit about what that project was and what were some of your key lessons learned?
Yeah, absolutely. Before I move on, though, one thing you said is going to the Gemba,
Mhm,
and you did a great job facilitating and kind of pushing me to prepare for this properly, and I really appreciated that because we have this process I was talking about, and we have 40 different offices around the world that do a part of this, right? And so that's kind of the field part of the nonprofit, is the work that we're doing in the field. And then there was the fundraising side of it also, the offices that raise funds so that we can do this field work, and they all have a hand in this. And one of the things that you said to me was, you got to have a representative from each step. And so at first that was kind of a mind job, like, how do I have people from 40 different offices come in? But we had a representative from West Africa, from our
mhm,
offices in West Africa, come to the Philippines and be presently there as part of it. And so that was kind of our going to the Gemba, was to have people that could represent that piece of work.
mhm,
And you talked about me writing down on the stickies as opposed to saying what's on the stickies, and you really challenged me to do that. So I really
mhm,
appreciated how you facilitate this as the sensei of, here's how a Kaizen works. And you do a great job of preparing everybody, setting up the leader to know their role, setting it up for success, and then making sure that it comes out really well. So you set all that up, so thank you, Carlos.
Joe, but the
Um,
point, we can spend a lot of time complimenting each other. But
why
the,
not?
the point is that when you, which is a key lesson, by the way, is like when you have a leader who gets it, like you, it's very easy.
Hmm.
And so the challenge is when you have leadership who think they know it all. And so it's going to that leadership mindset that I keep telling people about. And that Kaizen, the practice of Kaizen and the tools, it's easy. But it's when you're challenged with leaders who don't get it and that, they're not humble, that is difficult. And that idea that maybe we can dedicate that for another episode for
Hmm.
you and I to just have a coffee around that and
Hmm.
get our thoughts around this, because I do think it's challenging because it's hard for them to see it. When you're on the other end and you have a leader who's not humble, they don't see it.
Yeah.
And so, but it's an obstacle that gets in the way to all the things that we can do with Kaizen, which is getting the ideas from the people and all that.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that'd be great. I mean, and I've Harvard Business Review has some really good articles on how to level that playing field when you have a very hierarchical structure. And the office that we went to, the culture there is very hierarchical. So,
Mhm.
had to be really deliberate around what are our tricks of the trade that we can do so that leaders are seen as
Mhm.
equal to the people that do the work. And there's some, yeah, let's do another one and we can talk about the strategy to do that, to empower people, but then also not make them nervous because the leader's in the room.
Yeah, you're gonna have to decide whether, because we're gonna keep recording this seasons with you, and so you're gonna have to decide whether we go leadership or we go agile, and for the next one.
I'm good either way. Yeah, maybe leadership would be a good one to start off with.
Okay, let's do that.
Yeah.
Okay, so
So the
yeah,
black belt
tell us
project.
about
Yeah.
that. Yeah, that's fun.
So we had a really intense process on the field side that had a 1 week turnaround. We had a do or die. This has to be done in 7 days. And so as we were working with our colleagues in the field, it was kind of an all hands on deck process to get this done in 1 week. And these events might happen once or twice a month. So it was pretty intense on our field office staff, and the volunteers that they had to pull in to get this done. On the fundraising side, there was a lot of interest in raising more funds for this process. Uh, but that 1 week turnaround time had a limit of how many widgets we could produce in that 1 week. Um, and the field office was at peak, right? They couldn't do any more, and it was all hands on deck. They had to get volunteers in here. But the fundraising offices had a really good opportunity to quadruple the size of these events. So we had to come up with a really quick way to streamline that process, so that we could still have a 1 week turnaround time, but quadruple our throughput. We also kind of kicked this off right as COVID was starting. So we started this project with the intention of going to the field and actually, getting there and walking through that whole process. And then COVID happened. And so it was lockdown. So then all of a sudden we had to pivot and do it virtually. And we also couldn't get people together to try and test this process because it was on hold during COVID because we couldn't gather people together. So, we got some representatives, some people from that first Kaizen we did. We made sure we had representatives from each one. And then we came up with kind of an adjusted Kaizen approach, where it was more iterative. And we would have, we would do our initial work to map out the process. And then we'd come back a week later and meet for 2 days to go over brainstorming new ideas of doing it. And then we also employed automation analysis software so that we could put each step in this process and we could say how long each step of that process took, because we did get the times of the processes and all the steps. And then we could watch the flow of it through this automated piece of software and then tweak things and say, okay, what if we had, a cell that would basically do this whole process, because before we had everything mapped out as this is this section where you do this step and this section and this step, and we'd have big lines of queues through all of those. And so through this process, we said, well, what if we went back to that cell methodology and we did just in time, and a person goes into this one room where we do all 5 steps, and then when they're done, they're done and they can go on. There's no waiting in line. So, that was one of the big things that we did. And then we came up with an algorithm of, okay, if we need this many widgets produced or this many processes done in 1 week, then we need 4 cells so that we can, they do 500 each or whatever. So we did it remotely. We used some software to try and automate that process so that we could tweak it and adjust it without actually being face to face. And then when finally the travel ban was lifted and we were able to get together again, then we were able to test this out. And we did not hit the quadruple mark. We weren't able to get there, but we had the people in the room and on the calls in the Zoom room or the chat room talking about it, where they said, well, if your office is doing this, our office could also do the same thing and back you up. So if you're only able to get 1,000 and we need 2,000 in a week, well, why don't we partner on that? We split it, and then we can both own that, and it won't be so bad for either of us. And we went back to the fundraising office and said, okay, this is our approach. We're going to do a cell methodology. We reduce some of the waste, but our max capacity is this. So can we have 2 separate countries or 2 separate offices doing this process together? And the fundraising offices were fine with that. So by breaking it down, chunking it in, doing a just-in-time methodology, and getting buy-in from our business owner on the fundraising side, we're able to meet that demand. And it kind of gave us really good partnership between our offices, because now they had to coordinate and work together.
Joe, thank you for sharing about your black belt project. I really like the story of that project because there's so many lessons we can learn. One, I really like the whole idea of how you, again, back to the welding story, there's so many things that you were able to extrapolate when it comes to the thinking of the cells and streamlining the process and bringing people together. And the other one that I love is the simulation, because the whole idea of piloting things that are very complex. And maybe one third one, and this is something, again, you and I can expand in another episode, is the whole idea of virtual Kaizen.
Mm-hmm.
As you and I know, I was practicing that during COVID, but the reason why I bring that is because the potential is still there for global organizations. How can they continue to do Kaizen in a global environment? So I think you and I, maybe we can bring others like Amy and Brina to
Yeah.
brainstorm together how to approach this virtual Kaizen. But anyway, so anything else you want to highlight about your Black Belt project?
Yeah, a couple of things. The first is, we talked about metrics a little bit before, but this being my black belt project, I had to do the discipline of measuring everything. And so, we did that at the first part when we did the process before COVID hit. We were able to actually time things and go through and see what our baseline measurements are and our baseline metrics, and then came up with a hypothesis through using the automation software that if we make these changes, it'll reduce it by 40%. And since it was my black belt project and Carlos required me to do all of this stuff, I actually, did all of the measurements, and we came up with what the actual improvement percentage was. And then we could say, okay, if we do this many of these events a year, our total amount saved is X number of dollars. And X number of people hours, and we had those metrics coming out of it, which was great because then I got my black belt. But the other thing I learned is then if you do that, you have a really good promotional package that's ready to go to send to senior leadership of, hey, this team, and I sent it to the global director of, hey, we went through this process and we were able to reduce it by 40%. And now our capacity to hold these events has increased by this much. And, work with the fundraising offices that say that means we can raise this much more, and work with the field offices to say this is how many more people we can impact through this work. So through doing the discipline of the black belt, it really helped me appreciate having those metrics coming out of these projects so that you can promote it. It made the global director look great. It showed our team as being innovation leaders and continuous improvement leaders. It also, in partnership with you, helped to build the culture of continuous improvement by saying, hey, through this Kaizen process, through some of these continuous improvement pieces that we did, we made our business process easier and our throughput is bigger. So, internal marketing and internal branding was really helped because we did the discipline of measuring everything and marking what we improved.
Yeah, and I think that's an important point about the cultural transformation that goes with continuous improvement, which is that measurement part that you're talking about, the delivering results. Because as much as we love tools and principles and philosophy, nothing is going to open the door for more continuous improvement and Kaizen that, to your point, leaders understanding the impact and the results that can be
Mm-hmm.
achieved through this.
Mm-hmm.
And then the credibility that goes with that. So I really think you did a great job. And also the fact that this was one of the core initiatives of the organization, which that's another thing that I tell people is don't use continuous improvement to clean windows. Meaning,
Yeah.
meaning like put continuous improvement in places where it's important for the organization to achieve results. Because then you also prioritize your time and then you allocate the resources because it matters. And I
Yep.
think with that project, I remember that was one of the big initiatives of that big organization.
Yeah. It was huge. It opened a lot of doors for the organization. Yeah. It was great.
Mhm.
You
So,
know,
go
uh,
ahead.
just kind of following on that, it's tempting when you get through a Kaizen to say, yes, we identified our improvements. And if we go from this process to a cell process, then we can, double our throughput. And if we have partnerships between offices, we can quadruple it. We can meet our objective. And it's Kaizens does take time, and it takes a considerable amount of buy-in and commitment because you got to commit people to this at all levels. So
Mhm,
it's not free, and you do have to commit. You have to get buy-in from your leadership. So there's a little bit of pressure to do it, get done, and get back to business as usual.
mhm,
But this project really taught me the key of metrics,
mhm,
and the importance of not just saying, yeah, we quadrupled our throughput, but to take that next step to say, and that means this much dollars saved, this
mhm,
many resources freed up to do other work, this much more raised. Once you take that metric and apply it to the business and key performance indicators that top leaders care about, that's when you really are building your brand. So
mhm,
it takes a discipline to do that. But it's tempting to skip it, but it's crucial.
mhm,
The other thing that is crucial is coming away with a plan of how you're going to implement these changes. And you and I talked about this for that project of, putting together a really simple Kanban board where, what's our whole list of all the stuff that we want to do? What's up next? What are we currently working on and what's done? Just cards, simple cards, and having an online place to have that so that I can go there as the director and see, oh, we're making progress on that. And this has been sitting in the up next spot for a couple of months now. Maybe we need to throw that away. Or maybe as the director, I really need to focus people's attention on that. But having some kind of methodology coming out of a Kaizen where you say, here's how we're going to implement these changes and prioritize these so that we don't leave with a laundry list of stuff we should do. we come away with a list of stuff that we are going to do, and we can update regularly as we continue to improve.
Yeah, and that's an area where I think it makes you a stronger. I always think about black belts having like superpowers, and each one has different superpower. I think one of yours is the whole project management piece because I remember you at that during that time you were also digging deeper into the whole agile methodology,
Absolutely.
and I think that you were able to incorporate that into this challenge of how do we ensure that the plan gets implemented. And maybe this is something we can learn from you in another episode is
Absolutely.
show us some of those tools that are easy to implement
Hmm.
that helps to ensure that the Kaizen and the improvements are happening.
Yep. I think that would be a really good one to do next is how to come away with some kind of project plan and an agile methodology from a Kaizen to help it be successful.
Yeah, I
That would
love
be
that.
wonderful. That would be really
Yeah.
fun.
Yeah. Great. So let me close this with one final question for you. Now I think people understand how talented you are, how much experience you have, both as a Kaizen expert, Lean Six Sigma expert, but also as a leader. So, what advice would you give to people who are, well, it can be individual contributors or people leading continuous improvement or leaders who want to do continuous improvement um, and they feel stuck? What advice would you give to those people to continue in this journey?
Yeah, that's your comment of don't improve the washing of the windows. I think that's really key. And finding key performance indicators of the business that matter to leadership, and then aligning the kaizens that you want to work on with those key performance indicators. If you're not aligned with the strategy of the organization, your kaizen is not going to be priority. But if you can find processes that are crucial to the implementation or the execution or the realization of an organization's strategy, then you can get leadership behind it. Having leadership understand the value of continuous improvement and Kaizen is crucial.
Mhm.
I would say it's almost required, right? I don't know if you can do a grassroots continuous improvement. You can, but your impact is going to be limited. But if you get top level leadership and decision makers to identify, hey, we're trying to implement this strategy, and a big part of this is to break into this new market or to stabilize our position in this market, or really want to identify our differentiator and leverage that. If you can find out what those pieces of the strategy of the organization is, and then get your kaizens to be focused on improving those metrics and those key performance indicators, then you have a really good way to get leadership behind it. And then make sure your measurements address those key performance indicators. If you're trying to break into a new market and your measurement is all about waste on an existing market, that's not going to excite them. But if you say, hey, by doing this kaizen on this existing methodology, we're freeing up resources, we're freeing up people, we're freeing up these other things, so that we can focus on getting into that new market. That's an enabler for realizing the strategy. If you can get them into the new market, then you're executing the strategy, and that'll help get buy-in. But it's required to get leadership buy-in, because you got to get approval to have people put time on this. And if they're not going to be doing their normal day job because they're spending a couple days at a Kaizen, you got to have leadership buy-in. And without it, it's going to fall flat.
You're not going to believe this, but I was talking to a client yesterday about this. And I think I didn't do a good job explaining it the way you did. But guess what? I'm going to tell them, hey, listen to this episode, and I'm going to send them directly to this advice you're giving them because they were challenged exactly with what you just said.
Yeah.
And I was trying to articulate, but I don't think I was able to say it the way you put it, as far as like the link between what they were trying to do and the strategic objectives. And I
Mhm.
think I can now go back and say, listen to Joe and his advice in this particular challenge.
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you. You're very kind, Carlos.
So now we are also, we know that you're now also doing consulting. You're helping customers and people to implement a lot of this in their businesses, and whether it's for profit, non-profit, knowing you have a lot of experience. So where do we send them to contact you if they want to get your advice and services?
Yep. Yeah, you can connect with me on LinkedIn, and I'm sure you'll have the link to my LinkedIn profile. You can find me there and reach out to me and let me know what you'd like to do, and yeah, happy to help you make that a reality, or even just if you need a consult on how to approach something, happy to do that too.
Absolutely. I remember a few weeks ago you told me about this encounter with a person that was telling you about a challenge and how you, in 10 minutes, you walk them through the Kaizen process. And you say you have to just understand the customers and map the current state. And I just think that spending even 30 minutes with you will be a huge value for anyone who wants to learn and apply continuous improvement. And so I'm excited about that.